Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and today we will be talking about survivor guilt and shame. And after abuse, many survivors are expecting relief because they left and they survived and they finally saw this relationship clearly. But instead of only feeling free, there's a lot of different feelings that could go on. And today we're going to be talking about survivors feeling guilty and for survivors feeling shame and feeling responsible, confused about everything that had happened. Really, a lot of guilt surrounding what the children experienced and unsure whether this relationship was bad enough, I do quote unquote bad enough to count. So the aftermath here can be complicated for a lot of people because you're carrying shame for things that you didn't do, things that were not your fault. You might have guilt as well about things that you could not control. So what we're going to be discussing today are the 6 most common forms of survivor guilt and shame after abuse. But before we get to that, if you want to be a guest on our Survivor Story episodes, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com. Go to our guest form button, press that button, fill out the form, and we will go from there. Also, we have a support group at our website, so if you need support, join our support group at narcissistapocalypse.com. And we also have a newsletter where you get a free workbook in that newsletter every single week for every new Survivor Story that comes out. So that is all at narcissistapocalypse.com. So we are now going to talk about the 6 most common forms of survivor guilt and shame after abuse. So the first thing on our list is I should have left sooner, the shame of not seeing it earlier. And a lot of people here are saying to themselves in the aftermath, now that they have clarity, you start to remember the early signs of what was going on, the comments, the pressure, the jealousy, the control, the excuses that were going on, the moments that were explained away. You start to relive all of these things and you start thinking to yourself, oh my God, how did that happen? I should have left sooner. The signs were there. And that shame about not seeing those signs or living through those signs is very difficult to live with. But just remember, you are living in abuse at this time. You were living in a place where it was very difficult to see what was actually going on when you're in survival mode or when it's the frog in the boiling pot type of story where things are slowly being turned up. Things are getting normalized. You know, you're inside a forest at this point and not being able to see beyond the trees. And there's a lot of other stuff that's going on. You know, when lines are getting crossed, then there's like a loving stretch. You know, if you start to feel afraid, they could become kind again. You think about leaving and then they could apologize. You know, there's threats that could go on or promises of change. So there's just a lot of different things going inside an abusive relationship that even though these things are going on, you're still living within this person's system. And it's very difficult to understand what is actually happening. There's a lot of confusion going on and gaslighting going on. So when people say, I should have left sooner, it's a very difficult thing to do when everything is so confusing and you're living in another person's world. And when you're in it, clarity isn't easy, and there's a lot of fears and there's a lot of obligations and guilts and shames that are going on. So I hope that everyone who's listening to this, you know, it's hard to see the whole pattern of what's happening until you're out, and it's easy to shame yourself in the aftermath. But I hope everyone really takes it easy on you. You're not the one at fault here. Someone else was manipulating you and someone else was abusing you. And then up next, we have Who Am I Now, which is also shame-based. And this is how abuse breaks your sense of identity. So a lot of people see themselves in a specific way. You know, we had a recent story where someone didn't see themselves as an abuse victim. They didn't realize it until they were actually at a crisis center when questions were being asked to them. So a lot of survivors don't just feel shame for staying. They start to feel shame because the abuse changed the way that they see themselves. And before this relationship, someone might have said, I'm not someone this would happen to. We've heard that many times before. or I would leave right away. I know the signs. I have strong boundaries. I'm too independent for this. I would never let someone treat me like that. And sometimes on the show, we have therapists, and that's a big one. And their identity is someone who should have known about these things a lot of the time. They've been trained. So you hear, I help other people with this. I'm smart. I'm educated. I'm strong. How did this happen to me? Me of all people? So it really takes a shot at your identity and who you thought you were. And this is really tough to deal with because this then becomes an identity crisis. You know, if this happened to me, who am I really? And when something attacks your identity, it can become a real source of shame because you don't see yourself in that way. And you can really spiral from there. And from here, it can really make you distrust your own judgment on things again. It can start to make you think whether your strength was real at all. But abuse, just to remind everyone, it doesn't mean that your identity was fake. It just means that someone really learned how to work around your defenses, knew how to break all these things down, knew how to finesse in a lot of situations, knew how to confuse you, and knew how to gaslight you. They knew all of your pressure points on what to hit to dismantle that system and to dismantle your identity. So your identity is still there. Someone was just trying to break it on purpose. So just in the aftermath here, you can get that identity back and rebuild. It might take a lot of time, but that is who you still are. And I just want everyone who's gone through these two first things here, these shame-based ones, I'm giving you a big hug right now because a lot of you are dealing with this right now. And the next one on our list is I should have protected my kids better and guilt about what happened during this relationship. So for survivors with children, this could be huge for you, something that you're still dealing with. You could look back and think about what your children might have heard, what they saw, what they felt in the house, the tensions at dinner, silences in the car, the way they learned to read someone's mood. The times they were comforting you, the times they hid in their room, the times they became quiet because the house did not feel safe, or the abuse that they might have been enduring as well. And guilt will say to you, I should have protected them better. I should have left before they saw it. I should have left before it started happening to them. I should have stopped it. I should have known how much it was affecting them. And the guilt makes sense because you love your children. You wanted them to be safe. You wanted to protect the children from this relationship, from this abuser, and not, have this shape their life. But there's a lot of different things that are going on here. You were in a lot of no-win situations, damned if you do, damned if you don't, trying to navigate what was going on. And during the relationship, you were probably managing fear, confusion, money, the house, threats, emotional punishments, isolations, manipulations. So sometimes staying here was an attempt to protect the children. And sometimes leaving felt really dangerous. Sometimes keeping the peace was the only way to really get through the day. And this doesn't erase what happened. It just means that you were making choices inside a real pressured situation. You were making choices inside a prison. There was not really free choice going on. And in this time, you can grieve what your children experienced without turning all of that harm into being your fault, because it wasn't your fault. And number 4 is they're still being hurt. Guilt about protecting your kids after leaving. And this is a big one for parents because this is where survivor guilt becomes a little bit more painful. You left, you got out, you tried to create safety, but your children still have contact with the abusive parent. And now they're shuffling between homes. Maybe they come back quiet, angry, dysregulated, confused, repeating things the other parent said. So maybe the children here are being manipulated. Maybe they're being neglected. Maybe they're being abused still. And, guilt says here, I should protect them better than I am right now. They're still being hurt. Their lives were easier before, you might start saying to yourself, or maybe I made things worse by leaving. Maybe the 2-home life is hurting them more. And this is an awful type of guilt to carry because, you're the safe parent. And being a safe parent here, you're doing your best and you're going to feel guilt. But being a safe parent doesn't mean you have full control over any of these situations. So it just means that you have to be the steady home when they return to it. It means that you're helping them name what they feel without interrogating them. Sometimes it means staying calm with exchanges when you really want to scream because of the way they come back or how they're handling things because they're being affected by this abuse. Sometimes it means giving them just a place where a reality is loud because they're living in a place where they're not allowed to live in their own reality. They're living in the abuser's home. So even though you can't control fully what happens somewhere else, you can control what happens within your own home as best as possible. Hopefully that is going to alleviate the guilt that you're helping them as best as possible. But what they're going through, you didn't do anything wrong. This is the way things are at the moment. And they are now in a safer place that you left. And you have to remember that as well, because, at least they're getting clarity in one area of their life. And that's better than before where there wasn't any clarity. There's a lot of abuse going on and they're living in an other person's reality all the time. And the fifth one on our list is, did I really have it that bad? The guilt of comparing your abuse to others. And I hear this when people come on the show all the time. In our pre-calls, people are always saying to me, I feel bad doing this because my abuse wasn't as bad as other stories that I've heard. So let's discuss this because there's also a little bit of shame mixed in here. So survivors are often minimizing their own abuse by comparing it to someone else's. They had it worse. They were hit more. The other person's abuser was scarier. Oh, my abuser was a good provider, or my abuser was good with the kids sometimes, or the abuser that I had was not physical with me, or maybe I was overreacting when they hear someone else's story, or, maybe they weren't as bad as I thought when they heard a story that they thought was worse, quote unquote, worse than theirs. So this kind of guilt can make you feel like you're taking up space that you haven't earned. And you then might start thinking about the abusive person's good qualities or how they might have provided financially or had moments where they seemed loving. So doubt here can really creep in, but abuse does not stop being abuse because someone pays bills. Abuse doesn't stop being abuse because they had good days, and abuse doesn't stop being abuse because someone else's story sounds worse. Many abusive relationships are very confusing because there are moments that look normal from the outside. The abuser can sometimes look generous and charming, and they might be able to provide, and they could be funny, and they might cry, and they could help other people, and they could look like the good one in public. But this does not replace anything that was going on. There was possibly fear going on, obligation going on, guilt going on, shame going on, coercive control going on, punishment, emotional abuse could be going on, humiliation could be going on. Your pain is real. The abuse was real. The trauma is real. It doesn't matter if someone's story sounds bigger than yours. Trauma is trauma. And you have to remember that. And if you're feeling a lot of guilt for what someone else went through could be bigger than yours, and you start kind of comparing and thinking you didn't have it that bad, trauma is trauma. Abuse is abuse. And what you went through is real. And then the last one on our list when it comes to guilt after the relationship is when the abuser is, quote unquote, falling apart without me. Things along those lines. It could be mentally, it could be health-wise, it could be they are not very good at taking care of themselves because you've been doing it the whole entire time. So this is very guilt-based, and it can be very manipulative form of post-separation guilt. And your ex might say that they can't survive without you. They say their addiction has gotten worse because you left, and you're starting to worry and feel guilt. They might say that they are suicidal. They might say that you ruined their life. They might blame you for a health crisis. I've heard that before. The people have been blamed for their abuser having health issues. I've heard a heart attack before, or a relapse, or the breakdown, the job loss they might blame on you, or the relationship with their children might be falling apart, and then you're feeling guilt. And you start to feel responsible for this. So you start to think, should I have stayed and helped them? Did leaving push them over the edge? What if something happens and it's my fault? What if everyone else blames me for what's going on, because they might be telling other people that you're the one that did this? What if I really did abandon them? And this is where guilt really could become a big leash on you, and it hopefully doesn't bring you back into this relationship, but this is a big guilt. Someone else's crisis is trying to pull you back into your old role of being a caretaker, a stabilizer, an emotional regulator, a rescuer, the fixer. But just to remind everyone, you are allowed to leave a relationship that is hurting you. This person was hurting you. Remember that. That person was hurting you. You're allowed to stop being the person who manages someone else's addictions and rage and health and despair and consequences. You are your own person who deserves someone who's equal in a relationship, not someone who's just taking and taking and taking and taking and then exerting control and power over you. So if someone here is threatening suicide or self-harm, tell them to contact emergency services, a crisis line, someone who is equipped to intervene in these things. It doesn't mean that you have to return to a relationship at all. And maybe their pain is real, but you know what? That's their thing to deal with. This relationship is over. They were hurting you the whole entire time. You were not responsible for them. You were not responsible for them falling apart. And you have to stay in your lane here, and that guilt could be super strong. But you just need to stay in your lane and keep going forward, and let them deal with their things finally on their own. So that is it for this episode. Hopefully you found it educational and helpful and insightful. And if you're going through this right now, my heart goes out to you. And if you want to be a guest on our Survivor Story episodes, go to narcissistapocalypse.com, fill out the guest form, hit the submit button. We also have a newsletter with workbooks from every Survivor Story and a support group with Zoom meetings every Wednesday night, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. All of this is at narcissistapocalypse.com. And that is it for today. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you have a good night.